As you may or may not have picked up by now, I'm a Brooklyn gal, y'all. And it's where I was made, it's where I'm raising my family, and where my home is. But Brooklyn isn't where I'm from. I was born in Texas, Houston to be exact. And Texas ain't even where I'm from. My roots are in the low country of South Carolina. My great-grandpa and my great-great-grandma are from the low country. It's where my enslaved ancestors were brought. So my connection to this land and these people runs deep. Knowing my peoples, though, ingenious, powerful, and talented as they are, it didn't surprise me one bit to find out that people in the Low Country, with roots similar to my own, were the ones at the forefront of a movement to reintroduce two very special ancient grains to the world. I'm talking about fonio.
It has a lot of history and mysticism almost kind of behind it. Some cultures call it the seed of the universe.
The most important grain you've probably never heard of, and the other being America's former king crop.
If you're a chef, you want to cook with the Carolina Gold.
The granddaddy of all American rice. To find out what these ancient grains have to teach us about the present and future, we don't have to go too far. But please, listen to me when I say put on your poncho, douse yourself in bug spray, I'm serious, and pull on your galoshes. Honey, we're going to the heart of the Low Country. Welcome to Season 2 of the Black Kitchen series, a mini-series that shines a light on the brilliant and Black innovators changing the face of food as we know it. The history makers of today, many of whom will sow the seeds of tomorrow. I'm Chef Jade Verrett, aka Jade of all Jades, and I'll be your guide on this road trip across America as we go in search of the Black chefs, distillers, healers, historians, and ancient grains whose stories deserve to be told. To begin this episode's journey, we stick around the Charleston area and we head across the Stono Bridge to James Island. Surrounded by the serene waters of the Atlantic Ocean and the winding estuaries of the Stono River, James Island's lush greenery is dotted with Spanish moss and the towering trunks of majestic live oak trees. I feel super connected to this place because my family is from James Island. And in my first conversation, there's even a chance that I could have been sitting across from some long-lost family.
The thing is, we might for real be cousins.
No, we might, like, honestly, so. You have the same sized head as me, I think, in, like, shape.
Which is big.
It's giant.
I'm Chef Amethyst Ganaway, and I am the content manager and recipe developer for Yolele.
I met with my crystal sister, Amethyst, at her unofficial home base, Bowen's Island Restaurant on James Island, one of Charleston's most iconic and storied seafood spots. Picture a nondescript wood building with a wraparound porch and a well-worn screen door, perched at the ocean's edge overlooking acres and acres of oyster beds. Bowen's Island could not be more quintessentially Low Country. But because she's a chef and I'm a chef, before we got started talking about fonio, I wanted to know what I missed at the Charleston Wine and Food Festival that had just passed.
So Thursday, we had actually the fish fry out here at Bowen's Island Restaurant. Me and the team, the head chef here from Bowen's Austin, we decided to give everybody a real authentic Low Country fish fry plate. So we did whole fried fish. We had croaker, we had perch, and we had porgy. And then we did a little red rice. We did some slaw. There goes that
Low Country accent.
Yeah, we did a little slaw. We did some good cornbread. And then on Friday, my event was celebrating the matriarchs of the Low Country. So we celebrated about 8 or 9 Black women. We honored them. And also I kind of ushered in what I'm calling like the new vanguard of Black Low Country women chefs to just try to show people that, you know, we're still here. We're still here in the Low Country. We represent. And it was a beautiful night. It was a beautiful occasion.
I was in the presence of a matriarch in the making, a matriarch period. And as such, Amethyst is deeply intentional about her food and her work. Right now, as a matter of fact, one of her very many endeavors is her work with Yolele. Yolele is a food company founded by Chef Pierre Chiam with the mission to bring fonio's rich flavor and richer history to the world.
So I do all of our recipes, all of our social media. I do a lot of our digital marketing as well. And then somehow in my free time, I find myself do, again, recipe developing, recipe testing, a lot of brand partnerships. I do a lot of pop-ups. And somehow I find some time to sleep in between that.
Well, I'm glad you get a little bit of sleep because that's a lot.
A little bit.
So talk to us a little bit about, first of all, what is fonio? For the people who don't know, what is fonio?
All right, so fonio is an ancient, super tiny grain that was first cultivated in West Africa about 5,000 years ago. So it's literally one of the oldest cultivated grains in the world. It's highly celebrated in West African cultures. It has a lot of history and mysticism almost kind of behind it. Some cultures call it the seed of the universe, essentially.
Fonio is so nutritionally dense that it's one of the first things given to mothers after giving birth, and one of the first solid foods babies eat in Senegal and other West African countries. Parents sometimes even clip a pouch of it to their kids' backpacks on the first day of school for good luck.
But it's also a crop that is extremely sustainable. It's really helping to regenerate the Sahel region in West Africa, so a lot of desertification that's happening there.
So that means it's a pretty resilient grain, then, is what you're telling me.
It's an absolutely resilient grain. It's also one of the easiest grains to grow, so it makes it even better. So literally farmers just go out and kind of throw the seed out into a field.
Really?
You don't really have to do anything to it at that point. It grows. It can grow in extremely harsh conditions. You don't really need a lot of water or anything to grow it. It's going to hopefully help us solve some of the world's climate issues. It's building...
Okay, build on that a little because I wanted to get to that, and you did a great segue for that.
So like we said earlier, it was the fact that it just can grow as easily as it does no matter where you are, essentially. It's one of those grains that is soil fixing, right? It fixes the nutrients in the soil, so you could even grow it in between other crops as those crops are growing and maybe are depleting the nutrients from the soil around it. But that area specifically where they're trying to regenerate the Sahel is like the #1 most affected place by climate change right now. And rapid desertification is happening in the area. So there are thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people that go hungry, that die from hunger, when there's this grain that can be grown there. And the most difficult part of processing the grain is actually just getting that little hull off, because it's a grain, so it has a small hull on the outside.
Absolutely.
And the grain itself is the size of a grain of sand. So most of that cultivation, that farming, all of that behind it comes from the women in West Africa. And, my connection with that really is growing up here in the Low Country. We eat 2 main things, right? You eat rice and you eat grits. You eat corn, essentially. So it is a grain that, for me, is familiar to me because of how I grew up, but it's not a familiar ingredient for anyone here really in the U.S., and that's what we're trying to change.
In addition to all the climate saving, people feeding, and nutritiously good luck charming features of fonio, Yolele is also creating new markets for smallholder farming communities in West Africa. So far, Yolele has helped over 700 West African farming families, with plans to reach more than 2,400 soon. It seems like a no-brainer, and it's hard to believe it didn't happen sooner. So why now? And why Chef Pierre Chim?
All right, well, hopefully, Chef, I do you proud on this one. But if I'm not mistaken, essentially when he moved from West Africa to the U.S. to go to college, he was working in restaurants, and he realized that there's all these great new restaurants in New York, but there wasn't a lot of West African restaurants that would serve the food that he was used to specifically. So his biggest aim, I think, was just to bring that attention to West African ingredients as a whole. But then I think he also was able to see that there was something still missing, right? So what is a grain? What is something that we can do, again, to help combat the climate change, to help combat the hunger, and to actually build those supply chains so that people can support themselves in an economic way? So Pierre saw that he could do more, and he's been doing it.
All right, let's talk about somebody like my grandma, okay?
Yeah.
My grandma is a Southern woman who doesn't have the best diet when it comes to things, you know what I'm saying? She loves a salmon patty. She's gonna make a quick salmon cake out of some canned salmon. Yeah. It's always gonna be some beans and rice. But if I want to talk to my grandma, who has some health issues, about something like fonio, and she's used to rice, she's used to grits, how would I be able to talk to her about incorporating that into her diet?
So like you said, it's funny because I do talk to my grandma about this stuff, and she probably gonna try to pinch me for saying this out loud. But, you know, it is a difficult thing to get not just, you know, older people, but anybody who's just not familiar with the ingredient to try it. But for me, what I've realized works is showing how quickly it cooks, especially with my grandmother, her being able to still have that ability to cook for herself and make food for herself that is good, that's nutritious, is a big part of what's going to keep her healthy. And I think some of it too is showing the versatility of what you can do with it. So if you want to make it into just a side, you can have that. Or if you want to make your salmon patties, cook fonio into your salmon patties instead of your flour or whatever you use as your binder, right? Or if you want to have a nice cold bright green salad, okay, well, you can still cook this, cool it off, add it in, you get you a little bit extra protein. A great thing about fonio, which I've realized kind of also helps that conversation move along, is how nutritional it is, how much it can help you if you have high blood pressure or your sugar is high or anything like that, right? There's so many nutritional benefits behind it that it's kind of like a no-brainer. And, you know, I appreciate that Yolele took this one ingredient and made it into so many different things. So you can still have a healthy snack option and you can eat our chips. I mean, you can make fonio into anything. We got dessert recipes. We have the jollof pilaf, right?
Yes.
So down here, we used to eat red rice. Red rice comes from jollof, comes from chibajin. And to have something that is familiar, at least in flavor, helps bring it full picture and full scope to those who are not familiar with the grain. I will say, though, however, it's a change, you know, and is a big change to have, but I think finding the right way to incorporate that into their diets is a good way. So instead of making regular grits, fonio really does literally cook like grits. And in half the time.
And then more nutritional value.
Right? So it's like, okay, even if you don't want to eat this as a side, and when you make your shrimp and grits, just make this instead. And it's literally not going to taste any different.
It occurred to me when having this conversation about replacing grits and rice with the healthier fonio that maybe fonio was the source material. Could it be that fonio was the original grain that had been replaced by grits and rice in America? And if it is, wouldn't that mean that these days it's not really replacing grits as much as it's returning to power? So I asked Amethyst about the relationship between rice, grits, and fonio in Gullah Geechee culture.
So to kind of, I guess, take a step back, we got to tell people what Gullah Geechee is, right?
Yes.
So to be Gullah Geechee means that you are a direct descendant of the enslaved West Africans that were brought to the Americas, specifically from rice-growing regions of West Africa. Chef B.J. Dennis has said before that a lot of the enslaved that were brought here, specifically to different parts of the Low Country, were confused when they got here because they thought they got put onto a boat and the boat turned around and were taken back home because of how much it looks alike. So the people here, you know, the Gullah Geechee corridor, it actually runs from parts of North Carolina down to about Jacksonville, Florida. We're able to retain their West African roots and West African cultures, and a lot of that obviously comes into play with our food. So even though we don't eat a lot of fonio grain here, we used to eat a lot of millet, and fonio is a type of millet.
Okay.
So there is that connection there, but I think the disconnect happened because, again, those people were brought here to specifically grow rice, and that became the leading cash crop for Charleston, for the colonies, essentially.
Very
So
much so.
there was a lot of those ingredients that got removed or taken away from us, and rice became the main thing. And then corn came along, and corn was cheaper to be able to get. So,
Right.
Yeah.
So what do you think is causing the resurgence of farming traditional West African grains, such as fonio?
I think that Black food, West African food is so, quote unquote, unknown to the mainstream audience that people kind of don't think it's as good or as worthy or whatever. But then you find out about fonio, you find out about how nutritious it is, how good it is, how easy it is to cook. And I think that's starting to change people's minds and the way that they see our food.
Okay. Because you and I both live in the same world where we have seen things like couscous and quinoa just take off in certain cultural environments, right? You can go to stores and they're going to turn it into chips and crackers and snacks and all kinds of things.
Yeah.
But as you're talking about the economic side of fonio, how do you think we avoid that taking over that happens with a lot of things that are native to where we originally come from?
I think we're seeing it with what Yolele specifically is doing. I think a big part of that is having a person of that culture who knows what this is, actually being able to not only represent it and put that ingredient out there in the world in an authentic way, where it's like, we're going to show y'all that we're unapologetically an African-owned company. We got a big old map of Africa on the packaging. You literally can't miss what this is, right? So I think that's the biggest first step, was just showing like, here's the representation of who is eating this, of where it's coming from, of what this ingredient is, where, you know, and all of that. You know, unfortunately, with anything with capitalism in this world, like, there's going to become a point where hopefully we'll get almost out of our hands, right? Where it becomes so popular that it's, you know, something that's common. But I think that big first step was just making sure it was properly represented.
I love that. So you take that education, you were able to apply it to somebody like your grandmother, which I'm going to go back and do the same thing. How do you talk to the kids about fonio? How do you get them interested by also giving them thorough information as to where this comes from, so they have respect for this grain?
Down here, a lot of kids still we're not taught our history.
No,
right?
we're not thoroughly.
Right, so they don't even have the backhand knowledge of their cultural, you know, practices or their cultural foodways. And for me specifically to go back into predominantly Black and brown schools and show kids, one, that you can come from where we come from and have a successful career, but two, Black food has such a negative stereotype by the media and the mainstream kind of audience, to show them that, like, again, we were a people, we were a culture before we got brought here, right? So
which is why we got brought here,
right? And this is why we got brought here. So to show them that you can be proud of not only your culture, but the food that you eat within that culture, to know that you had a history before being brought here or whatever, it kind of again helps them see that bigger picture.
I love that through this grain we can teach our children to be proud of our culture and our food. But what with the capitalism of it all, I was wondering how to make sure the message and culture behind fonio doesn't get whitewashed as it becomes more popular, to the point where we find ourselves losing touch with the history again.
Again, from the jump, you have the people who know what this is representing it, right? Like, there can't be any disconnect from what it is. The experts are here to tell you what it is. So I think that's one way you can combat that. But I also think that it's almost kind of weird, because you almost want it to take off so much that it is so mainstream that people can just go to Walmart and go pick it up, or wherever, right? Anybody can go grab it. But I think the biggest thing is just making sure that they understand what it is, what it does. And again, at least on our packaging, like, we put all that information on there. Again, you're not going to walk by in the store. I've literally never seen another packaging or anything that actually has an entire map of Africa, the continent, that tells you, literally shows you where it's grown at. On the back of the packaging, it tells you the whole story about what this ingredient is. And being able to use like social media or do things like this interview, right, to bring that awareness while it's still growing, I think is important. Yeah.
And I love that you're helping to educate, and Yolele is helping to educate us as a people. Even in culinary school, we had one day where we learned about Africa. It was one day in world cooking, okay? So world cooking included every region of France and multiple days in Italy. And I think we had 2 days of the Mediterranean, and then different Asian countries. And then it was Morocco. And Morocco was representative of all of the continent of Africa, and it was one day of learning. And I have an opinion in the culinary world that we were the original chefs. The aunties in the villages, you know, our grandmothers we talk about, we were the original chefs, as opposed to just putting the restaurant structure into place.
I didn't go to culinary school, but I know that predominantly those schools are predominantly white and wealthy. You got to have some money to go to culinary school. So it says a lot. It says a lot on the fact of obviously how disrespected, you know, our foodways have been for so long. But to also finally have people recognize that our foodways deserve to be on that same platform as French cuisine. I always tell people, I never knew my grandmama was making a roux, or that she was cutting a brunoise, or, you know, or chiffonade.
Making a mirepoix,
or chiffonade and collard greens, right? I always thought that's gravy, right? You're just making gravy. But
Same.
so like our food is what we have still, not only those techniques, but like you look at black pot cooking and you look at these different ingredients and all these things, and it's like you said, like not only are we the originators of what American cuisine is, but those traditions that are West African or are African are just as unique, just as special, just as difficult to create as anything else is. And they deserve, just like their ingredients, to be put on that same platform and celebrated and recognized.
All right, one more question for you. What's the future of such an ancient grain? What do you think that looks like for us?
I hope it gets to a point where it is something that's commonplace on everybody's plate. I see a lot of these, like, they're called shoppy shops now, popping up around the country, and I understand it's definitely going to be a different type of market to try to break it into the South specifically. But the way that it's growing right now, like, I can't foresee the next 5 years this not being something that everybody talks about in the same way as couscous or the same way they talk about quinoa. And I think that it's something that's going to only bring more awareness and hopefully bring more opportunities to people.
So chefs, black chefs like ourselves,
That's
we got to
right.
do that work, do we not?
That's right.
I love that. Amethyst, my girl, my crystal sister. I love this. I left James Island with a full heart, in part because I felt so connected to my family, my ancestors, but even more so because I felt connected to my culture that existed before slavery. Imagine, this tiny little grain called fonio carries within it a story of pride, resiliency, and reclamation. And speaking of story, our exploration into ancient grains from the diaspora continued 90 miles south at a rice farm outside of Hardyville, South Carolina, where I may have even summoned my cultivating ancestors. You hear me talking like I grow rice?
Yeah. Before a few minutes, I'll have you growing rice.
Listen, long as I don't have to see no snakes, I want to try.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And these things, I never feel bad about any of these things. Alligators. We got timber rattlers around here. We got diamondback rattlers. We got cottonmouth moccasin, and we got copperhead. We got all these snakes that inhabits this area right here.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't feel bad. I don't hate them because they were here when we got here.
Yeah, that's respectful.
I respect all wildlife.
I wish everybody thought that way. We might not be here.
I respect all these different varieties, and the mosquitoes, the yellow flies.
You respect the mosquitoes? I've never heard anybody say that.
I'll wear a bug tail or whatever. I'll spray down with some type of organic spray or whatever we about in the rice field because the mosquitoes were here whenever they came in and started growing this rice. And where I grow rice at, it almost like that was where God created those mosquitoes.
Okay. So they're extra
because those mosquitoes they don't have any manners at all.
He said these were touched by the hands of the Lord.
It seemed like it because all year long, those mosquitoes are there. You got a lot of things going on in the rice field.
I just said I wanted to try it, and now you're trying to talk me out.
No, you wouldn't have.
I'm sitting here with Rollen Chalmers of Hardyville, South Carolina, and Rollen's Raw Grains in your beautiful store that's getting ready to open soon.
Yes, we do. We have a grand opening coming up here pretty soon. I'm all excited about that, the new store and everything.
And we're excited to be here, but we're really excited to talk to you about your Carolina Gold.
Sounds good. I'm happy to have you guys here. We'll talk a little bit about the Carolina Gold today.
Before we begin, some deets. The grand opening of Rollen's Raw Grains was April 8th. So although you've missed the party, you can now buy the best Carolina Gold rice next time you find yourself in Hardyville, South Carolina, or from their online shop. And you'll also need to know a bit more about Carolina Gold. So the earliest Africans brought to the Low Country were targeted specifically for their knowledge of how to cultivate rice in that uniquely soupy, swampy, marshy texture of soil. Driven by the beautiful golden color of the crop and the unique taste and texture of the grain, Carolina Gold quickly became the most lucrative commodity in the Americas at the time. And with its increased popularity, cruel labor demands increased too. And it kept going like that until the speed of agriculture advancements outperformed the pace of enslaved labor. Soon after, Carolina Gold fell out of style in favor of rice that was easier to grow in other parts of the country. Fast forward to today, where
rice hadn't been grown in the Low Country here for many years.
Why was that? That started top of the 19th century, you said before?
It was right around the top of the 19th century because of the labor. That's what's required for growing rice. It is very difficult for you to harvest this rice out of these fields. These fields are not like a field out there maybe in Arkansas or somewhere where you got a different texture of soil. The soil in this area, we call it a gumbo. It's almost like silly putty.
Oh, it's muddy and swampy.
It's muddy.
Okay.
When it's dry, it's as hard as cement.
Oh.
But when it's wet, it's just as slippery as an eel. It's just like you grease it. You know, you hardly can stand up in it.
So that's what rice has to be grown
Yeah,
in.
it needs to be grown. You can grow it in other type of soil, but this Carolina Gold and Charleston Gold prefer this type of soil.
Okay.
So it was almost like you actually had to have humans out there at the time, someone who could walk in these areas and hold this rice and cut it and harvest it, because you didn't have a machine that could get in there and cut it.
Over 2 decades ago, Glenn Roberts, founder of Anson Mills, went on a quest to reintroduce Carolina Gold rice. His journey led him to Turnbridge Plantation and the best farmer in the Low Country.
Nobody think that rice is actually growing down in these areas no more.
Okay.
Really, being serious.
Okay.
And then with me being an African American too, they're looking at me too and they're saying, you know, where's this guy farming rice? Because rice was kind of a bad deal for African American were used in these fields.
Okay.
For harvesting this rice.
Right.
So, you know, most people, they're thinking, well, you know.
You won't be tied to.
You don't want to go back into this again.
You're right. But it's a different motive.
It's a whole different motive.
Yeah.
And to me, it's real rewarding. I love doing it. I don't think it's something that I'm going to get to be a billionaire, a millionaire out of this thing right here. But I enjoy rice farming. Since I've been rice farming, I met some of the nicest people that you ever can meet.
So you started this when you were younger?
I didn't grow up farming it. My mother influenced me a lot.
Okay.
Because of some of the things that she would tell me about growing rice with her grandmother that had raised her up. And she would always tell me about the different stories about her grandmother and how she worked in some of the rice fields that was right here near Savannah called Fife Plantation.
So this was your great-grandmother?
That was my great-grandmother.
You did not know your great-grandmother in the physical sense? Okay.
I did not.
So how do you feel knowing that's what your great-grandmother was going to do and you're doing the same thing? Does that make you feel a little more connected to your ancestors and lineage?
It really do. You know, knowing some of the things that they had, you know, endured when they were coming up in life just to live.
Let's go back a little bit, because you said you started off farming, but not necessarily with the Carolina Gold rice.
Okay. It was mainly some of the other brands of rice that I farmed. There's not a whole lot of people into rice growing.
Okay.
You know, you got in Arkansas, you have, you know, your larger fields that supply rice for the whole United States. But these specialty grain that we grow, this Carolina Gold, Charleston Gold, it took off right here in South Carolina.
So what's the difference? Tell me what the specificity of Carolina Gold rice is.
It's a more healthy rice. The flavor of it is different from any other rice, and it's very aromatic. Carolina Gold got a nutty taste to it, and it has a nutty aroma to it when you're cooking it. People, you know, they come up and they buy Carolina Gold and Charleston Gold, and they'll come up and they say, well, what's the difference in these two rice you have here? The difference in the Carolina Gold and Charleston Gold is that Carolina Gold is a shorter grain.
Okay.
Charleston Gold is a longer grain, all right? Carolina Gold is going to carry a more robust aroma.
Okay.
And that nutty taste. The Charleston Gold is a little bit the nutty taste to it, but by far the Carolina Gold is going to be, if you're a chef, you want to cook with the Carolina Gold.
Okay.
Yes.
So I'm a chef, Mr. Rollen.
Okay.
And I would like to use your Carolina Gold rice. But I hear there are other chefs that have already gotten it first.
Sure.
Do you know what they're doing with your brand? Do you know how they're working with it?
Those guys are really cooking it up in these restaurants. Vivian Howard, owner of the Chef and the Farmer Restaurant, North Carolina, and also in Charleston now. Vivian, when she first got things going, she moved back from New York. She wanted to see where the rice was grown.
Of course.
Vivian came down with her crew, came to Turnbridge, in which at that time, I was growing rice for Anson Mills.
Okay, right.
Okay, I didn't have my brand at that time, but I was the one supplying rice for her through Anson Mills.
Right.
I was a grower.
You were still growing, but it just wasn't yours.
It wasn't my brand at that time. Mashama Bailey and John O. of the Gray in Savannah and also in Texas restaurant. Mashama Bailey, when she first got started up and things really got cooking and whatnot, with the gray over there, James Breeder one, Mashama came over with her crew. And chefs went to work in the kitchen. They came in my rice field, cut rice, milled it the old way that African American slaves milled it and everything with mortar, pestle, and everything. Some of the chefs that was from Copenhagen.
Oh, come on, Copenhagen International.
Chef Alessandra out of Copenhagen. They came over, cut the rice by hand. We milled it by hand, cooked down at Turnbridge. Wow. So I've had a connection with a lot of different chefs. Chef B.J. Dennis.
Oh yeah, I know Chef B.J.
Yeah, Chef Modu out of West Africa.
Wow.
Gambia. All of these guys.
Not to create no enemies, but what was your favorite dish that you had made with your own product?
The most favorite dish that I ate with my own product was a dessert dish that Chef Modu and I created last year for the Sea-Week. That's a big outdoor event. It happens every year in Charleston, South Carolina.
Sea-Week.
Sea-Week.
Okay.
50,000, 60,000 people pushed through there in 3 days. Modu came over. We created a dish with raw peanuts and Carolina Gold rice.
Two things that we
right.
we brought.
And what happened here, my mom would always tell me about, they ate this stuff called clabber. It was almost like a sour milk.
Oh.
That when they milked the cows, when she milked the cows for her grandmother. And her grandmother would save this and would call clabber, and they would eat it with rice. And this rice had to be Carolina Gold. They would eat it with the rice. But what Modu did, he made up a dessert made from raw peanuts and that soured milk and some sugar out of that rice.
Wow.
And we introduced that at Seaweed on stage. He was cooking it, and we had ushers passing it out there in the audience. And these people just went wild over it, and I went wild over it. And that's what we did for that big event, Modu and I.
That's beautiful innovation, Rollen, where you're able to take something that's ancestral, something that your family's been doing for generations, and then you have newer chefs who take that product and they turn it into something beautiful and delicious. That's how we keep tradition alive and keep it fresh and keep it new, is it not? Let me ask you another question real quick. Rice farming, is that predominantly farming that Black Americans are doing?
I don't know of any other Black farmer. You may run into someone and say they're growing some rice, but they only have a couple rows of rice. It's not on the scale that I'm doing.
Right.
The size of field that I'm doing. They don't know where to actually start at. They don't have the equipment to get in and do things. If I got the land, I can build a rice field anywhere I need to build one.
I know that's right, Rollen. Talk your stuff.
I can go in and build it.
I know that's right.
Yep.
So that's something that we need to try to reclaim a little bit as a people.
Yep.
Everything you're speaking of, you've even spoken about our older ones, our elders who have passed away, and all of these beautiful skills that they have. How do we continue that? Like, how do you pass this on to younger generations so that it's not lost amongst us as a people?
They really need to look at, it's nice having all this modern, everything is modern, and I appreciate it. I really do. But you need to look at a lot of these things that took place years ago back then.
Yes.
Because it's just like when the pandemic came in, you couldn't go nowhere. Everybody was just freaking out. Oh man, I can't do this. I can't go here. I can't go and buy no food. I can't order food. No one can touch it. You can have a small place, a really small place that you own, and you can plant.
Yeah.
You can plant something. And you can always have something every season to eat. It may not be exactly what you want, or you can tailor it to your liking. And it's simple. And more than likely, you'll always have more than you can use for yourself and your family. You can always help another friend.
Absolutely.
You can help a friend. So, it's good to learn something about growing something.
I feel like it's so pertinent so that we don't lose tradition. And like you said, also life skills.
Life skills.
Yeah.
That's where we're losing a lot of it now. We have no one that really care about life skills. You think you can just go to a store or what have you and buy all the time. But it's and the way the world is changing now, it's not by a year, it's almost by a month.
Ooh, it's by minutes.
It's really scary.
Yeah, it is.
A lot of things that's happening is really scary. So, you got to make sure that you got things where you can stay right at home, camp at home, and you can do different things and eat right there at your own place.
What would you say to a young person who said, my family don't have nothing to do with rice farming, but I want to feel connected and I want to get into it? How do I do that, Mr. Rollen?
Come on and join me for a day. out in those fields, when we're doing some of the harvesting or planting out there, you see a whole different aspect of it. You would. You really would in growing the rice and everything out there.
And he's serious, y'all. There's not a more generous and sincere man on this planet. If you want the experience of flood rice farming, go see Rollen. That is, if you're okay with the gators, bobcats, and mosquitoes. Oh, and snakes. Countless species of snakes. Because I hate snakes. Thank you, Mr. Rollen.
Thank you, too.
All right.
For y'all, you guys coming here today.
Oh, for you sharing. Your energy is beautiful. I love it. It really is.
It's a pleasure.
All right. One more thing before we go. You know it's postcard time, and I sent you one from James Island and Hardyville. Dear friend, sweetheart, travel buddy. I never doubted our friend Rollen for a second, but now that I've tried it for myself, I can tell you that his Carolina Gold is every bit as flavorful, nutty, and full-bodied and fresh as he says. I'm spoiled for all of the rice at this point, and when it comes to the fonio of it all, the number of times I've now encountered Yolele's fonio chips in the wild tells me its ascent to the top is well underway. I love to see my people win, because when we win, we all win. And for all the reasons why these ancient grains are so amazing, to me, the truly powerful parts are operating just beneath the delicious surface. Like, what's obvious about fonio is that it's delicious, nutritious, and profitable. But what's important is that it could feed lots of people cheaply while helping to restore our planet. What's obvious about Carolina Gold is that it tastes incredible. But what's important is that it's a permanent homage to the history and craft of Low Country cooking. What's important is that by sharing his love of Carolina Gold, Rollen is also sharing his passion for growing and farming and developing a relationship with the environment, which is on its own a tool for liberation. Small grains from the past with massive implications for the future indeed. Anywho, all this talk of growing has me giddy for our next stop, where a couple of vegans are going to do their very best to convince me of their plant-based ways. See you next week. Peace and blessings. XOXO, Jade of all Jades. P.S. Listen to the bonus track of me at the rice farm talking more with Rollen and trying to avoid the reptilians. Thank you to Hope and the crew at Bowen's Island Restaurant for being such gracious hosts, and to my Low Country cousin, Chef Amethyst Ganaway. And thank you to Rollen and Francis Chalmers of Rollen's Raw Grains for your time and generosity. To find out more about where to purchase fonio or Carolina Gold rice, please see our show notes. Season 2 of the Black Kitchen series, Innovators, was created by Hines and Wyden and Kennedy and produced by the Meta Creative Co. Follow us at HinesBKI on Instagram. And while you're at it, please take a minute to rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts and let us know what you think. More reviews help more people find us. Subscribe to the Black Kitchen series podcast on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. I am the Jade of all Jades. Thanks for listening. See you in the next episode.